Welcome to the 12th Cast podcast dedicated to the 13th Gate. Today I have two very special guests with me, and we're going to be discussing the MK Ultra programs that took place here in Montreal, in Canada. Trigger warning around this topic. I know that this has affected many people, and so we're just going to dive into the topic quite deeply. I'm bringing in two guests, multi-generational people who have experienced the trauma. I'd like to just bring this forward with as much intention for healing the collective, and for bringing forth awareness, and also to demystify what MK Ultra is. We've heard this term many times in the community, in different articles, people referring to it, but perhaps not everyone is familiar with what exactly it is, what it stands for, and the history of it, and how people, real people in our lives have been affected by it. So I am going to start just by diving in a little bit to what MK Ultra is. And I am not completely versed on this topic. I've studied it. I have many connections to what this is, but there might be some small errors with history. And perhaps my two guests can bring in information that they know as well. But most of the information is widely agreed upon. And so this was a project that started in November of 1945 by the US government. It was an Operation Paperclip, which sought to gather scientists from all around the world. Many of them were post World War II. And so a lot of them were Nazis, worked in the Nazi camps, and participated in the experiments there. Some of them working very closely with Hitler. And a lot of the scientists were brought together in order to really fine-tune controlling human behavior through many means, psychedelic and hallucinogenic drugs, electroshock treatment, radiation, graphology, paramilitary techniques, and psychological, sociological, anthropological methods, among others, and a vast open field of mind experimentation, trying anything that might work, legal or otherwise, on willing and unwitting subjects. And so this is a project that changed names many times. It started out as Project Chatter, Project Artichoke, and then morphed into MK Ultra. It's based on a lot of the German techniques that were used, and it delves pretty deeply, essentially using these techniques for military protection, for gaining information from spies, for controlling, for example, different military personnel in order to withstand very intense situations if ever they were to be captured by the enemy, and to develop interrogation methods to exert control, enhance techniques, and establishing ways to prevent hostile control of agency personnel. It was also a project that was used for developing bioweapons development and space aeronautic development, how to condition subjects to withstand environments in space. So there were a lot of implications with this project, and there were many participants. During my research, I was able to obtain the number of 1,600 participants in this project, scientists that were recruited. And this project lasted for quite some time. It started in 1945 and it continued on actually into the 70s. And during that time, Freedom of Information Act allowed different people to bring forward documentation of this project. And a lot of the documents were destroyed. So what we do have on paper as documentation is still information that is highly sensitive and that points to an incredible amount of illegal activity in terms of abuse, government abuse of its citizens. The information that was lost is information that we can only sort of, guess at in terms of what techniques were being used beyond the information that we were able to bring forward with the documentation. So there are a lot of techniques that aren't spoken about in the documentation that dive even deeper into crazier and crazier experiments that were done on people, on many people without their consent. I'm going to bridge this now into where we'd like to take it in terms of, Linda, your mother's experience with the MK Ultra program. I know that at the McGill University, they had set up, Dr. Cameron had set up a facility outside of the university, behind the university, in a barn. It was renovated to be able for him to do his work there, and that's where he brought in an enormous amount of subjects to do the work that he was spearheading on mind control. And a lot of it had to do with induced comas using insulin shots, as well as other drugs to keep the patient asleep for prolonged periods of time, sometimes 25 days, moving up to 3 months. And also using defragmentation techniques. The whole goal, or what he perceived as what he was experimenting on, that he perceived would allow him to erase what was in the mind, in the human mind, in order to reprogram the person with anything that the military would desire, was to put them to sleep and then have recordings playing for days on end with different phrases repeated over and over again. And then there was also the electric shock therapy, which is also meant to defragment the mind and to erase all memories and to erase that person's identity in order for him to input into the person's brain different messages that would build up a new identity and a new personality. So in terms of what your mother experienced and what you experienced of your mother during the time that she was involved in this program.
My mother was suffering from depression, and it was her local doctor who suggested that she go see a psychiatrist. But at this time, it was a doctor from St. Mary's Hospital. And through her consecutive visits, her medication increased. She would be taking, at first, just mild sedatives during the day to ease her anxiety, and a mild tranquilizer for the evening so that she could get some sleep, because she was having problems sleeping. She was suffering from depression in those days. And I have to preface this by saying that this started when I was only 14 years old. So my knowledge of that mental health issue was very limited. And what doctors would say would be taken as holy scripture. So everybody trusted the doctors to be telling us the truth and having everybody's good health as their major focus. Increasingly, my mother got worse, and that's when the first term that she spent 5 weeks in the psychiatric department. And during that time, she was given electric shock treatment. When she came out, she was literally constantly shaking like a leaf. And unless she took those tranquilizers and unless she took any kind of sedative, she wouldn't even be able to function. And this situation continued for years. My mother just became increasingly more and more unmanageable in that sense. And she went into the hospital at least 4 times for 4 or 5 weeks at a time. And at one time, after she had had electric shock treatment, I went to visit her. And when my mother saw me, she started to cry, and she came up to me and said, "Oh my God, you're still alive. You're still alive. Did they hurt you?" And that is not a normal response to seeing your daughter, as far as I'm concerned. But like I said, I was too young to understand what was going on. And I thought that it was totally my mother, who was starting to go crazy. And the final diagnosis for my mother was that she was a paranoid schizophrenic. And she went in with a depression. So after all those treatments, she didn't get any better. She got clinically worse. And this led to years and years later, where her addiction problems to these medications, to these tranquilizers and sleeping pills, completely through an upheaval. She was a non-functioning mother. It got progressively worse from there, because by now I was in my 20s, and my mother actually had a child, my brother, when I was 20 years old. And so the thing is that I would be going to work, coming home, taking care of my brother. And what's even worse is that she would call me up 3 or 4 times during the day to start berating me for not caring about her, not caring about my brother, and that if I didn't go home immediately, she couldn't guarantee that he would be in safe hands. So I would have to leave work and go, and I had this hanging over my head every day. My father became reclusive. He would not speak. For years and years, this went on. And up until the point where my mother just killed herself through overuse of these sleeping pills that she used to take during the day so that she could sedate herself even further. and not remembering how many pills she took, her heart just gave out, and that was the disaster. But in a way, it was a relief for my father, and it was from then on, my father and my brother came to live with my husband and I. By then, I had 3 children, and all of this happened because she went to the doctor with depression, and she came home a totally different person. My mother and father were born in Italy, and they wanted to have a better life. So for them, the best step was to go to England and try making it there. But in order to do that, they had to leave me behind. And they left me with my grandmother and came back to get me when I was 6 years old. Finally, they could bring me to England with them. But let me preface this by saying that during the time that they were in England, they were having a fun, joyful, and happy life because they were doing something that was paying them well and that they enjoyed. So we moved to Canada and lived in Montreal. And from there, it just became more or less of a harder and harder struggle for my parents to get jobs that were sufficient to be self-sufficient. At first, we were living with my godparents, and then finally, my father got a job as a milkman, and so we were able to get our own apartment. But my mother had no idea that the winters in Montreal were so miserable, cold, and brutal. She was not acclimatized to that kind of weather, and the only work that she could do was to be a cleaning lady, and in those days she was getting $1 an hour. So life was hard, and she, because of the weather and the work and not being happy where she was, my mother was getting depressed. And so my father asked my grandmother to come and stay with us for a while to see if that would pick up her spirits. And it didn't work. And that was about the time that she started with the doctors and the medication and so forth. And I believe that that was probably in 1963. It was, and the first time she went to St. Mary's Hospital, but after that, I have no actual memory of whether she went to the Allen or if she went to any other hospital, except that for the time that I went to visit her. And right now, I couldn't tell you which hospital that was. This happened a long time ago. I'm 73 now.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, definitely.
And I'm sure they were pretty much hiding what they were doing and didn't tell people exactly what they were up to. And anybody who had any suspicion was quickly labeled as also paranoid.
it definitely ruined our life. because had she been helped rather than made worse, things would have had a different turn.
I agree. And there are other women that have come forth. There is a class action lawsuit currently happening that's still in motion, that's currently under review, but it has been accepted by the courts. It is legitimate, and these victims have been recognized as having been abused during these experiments with electroshock treatment and sleep deprivation, and also sleep induction for long periods of time with tranquilizers and so on and so forth. So it is, there are many cases that I've read about, and many women, such as your mother, who have experienced similar, extremely similar aftermath effects of these treatments. Some of them were able to regain their memories. Some of them were not able to regain their memories at all, and were not able to continue participating in society, sort of like what happened with your mother, where there was like a slow degradation from the abuse that happened, that just became worse and worse. There were a few that were able to kind of, get back to somewhat of a functional state, but it appears that most of the victims of these experiments were permanently damaged from them.
Well, I believe so, because if my mother had remembered they did this to me or did that to me, then that would have opened some doors, perhaps, into my father and I being able to investigate a little bit further and get more involved. But she never remembered what they were doing to her. She never came home and said they did this to me or did that to me, because I don't think she even remembered what they did to her. So in that respect, they had the free reign of all these sessions with her that we didn't know about, that we could have stopped if we had known about them. But that's how sinister this is.
That was by design.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they did that on purpose.
Following that trail and getting documentation mustn't be so easy in terms of names, but there might be a list of names out there, and that might be a possibility of verifying if your mother's name was on the list that was recovered. Thank you so much for sharing that. I feel that it's very courageous of you to come forward, and I'm sorry for what you've had to experience. It sounds like something like a nightmare, like something that no one would want to experience, obviously. And just knowing that there were so many victims involved in these experiments is pretty mind-blowing, right? To know that these things can take place kind of under the cover. People, going in just to see their doctor for things like postpartum depression or anything related to anxiety or not feeling well, and then end up getting routed to these extreme, these extreme experiments where they put people under horrific, into horrific environments and under horrific procedures. So I'm sorry you had to experience that, the effects of it, and in terms of the multi-generational effects, is there anything, Tina, that you would like to add in terms of your experience of that, being part of that, having your grandmother being involved, being a victim of this, and how it might have impacted your life, or how it's impacting your life right now?
Well, I didn't really get to meet my grandmother. I was too young, she took care of me when I was young for a day or two, but I don't think that lasted very long. So I don't have a lot of experience with her, but I do have a lot of experience with, the brainwashing that's happening right now on a mass scale, and how they've used that MK Ultra stuff and those experiments, and how they've gone mainstream with it, and nobody seems to be noticing how we're all being hypnotized and hit with all these frequencies and all of these things that are dulling our senses, making us more lethargic, making us want to eat more, making us depressed. And nobody seems to know where it's coming from, but I know where it's coming from. It's coming from your TV, it's coming from your radio, it's coming from those 5G towers, it's coming from the information that's coming from those shows and the commercials, and we're being bombarded constantly with the technology that they were developing during that time. Now, they weren't developing that for nothing. They were developing it to use it on us on a mass scale.
How to control the masses.
Exactly.
Yes.
So, here we are in the future, and I feel like it's my job to now help people deprogram from this brainwashing that we've all undergone. And we've all been a part of this experiment. Nobody got out of this. We were all part of it. We're literally living through it right now with the social media programming that they use. If they decide that you are going to be, kicked out and canceled, now all they have to do is get all their little bots to start posting things that you need to be canceled, and they've got you canceled. They literally can tell people how to think within a day. They can make the masses think anything they want. So, they got really good at that stuff that they did back then. They used that information and they're using it on us now. So I studied hypnosis, I study the brain, and balancing out the hemispheres of the brain because of all this brainwashing that happens. It is a real thing, and it's happening to us all.
Yeah, this dives a little bit deeper into predictive programming. I think it ties in the MK Ultra experiments were to further discover how to brainwash people and how to control people. And then that applied on mass scale with predictive programming, as you mentioned, through TV shows, through Hollywood movies, where ideas are subtly implanted into the subconscious mind so that they will be more easily accepted without resisting. This happens so seamlessly, people aren't aware of it. They go for a good movie, they sit down, they're expecting entertainment, but what they're really experiencing is this subtle imprinting of ideologies and
but it's not limited just to the movies. It's on your TV, it's on the radio. All these ads, all these shows that you watch, they've all got a certain theme, and they've all got the same kind of programming that they want to give you.
And not just when we say programming, like they actually send out a frequency, a sound vibration that is physically affecting your body, your cellular structure. Right? It's not just the words. It's not just the images. They're physically sending out a frequency through the airwaves, through the sound waves, like through these towers. Like we're being penetrated and attacked physically and psychologically.
This is a little far-fetched for some of our listeners, but I encourage you to look at the effects of sound frequencies on the body, on the cells.
Well, there's actually documented proof that they were using the TV. If you go and look it up, it's like one of the most basic ways that they were doing this. And how do you think that they programmed people while they were sleeping? They would play TVs in the background and they would keep their eyes pinned open while they were under all these tranquilizers, and they would make them watch all these horrific things and implant thoughts into their brains through audio, and would play that on repeat to see if they could change the way the personality is. And they certainly were able to do that. Now we don't have to pin our eyes open, but most of us are sedated anyways. Most people are on antidepressants these days, so they're sedating themselves already, and they're watching TV. What do you think is happening during that time? It's the same thing that they were doing during these experiments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
they got really good at it too. They got technology that's really refined now. They only show us a small portion of what they're doing.
Well, if you imagine, they were only able to recover 16,000 documents, and during the course of over 30 years or close to 30 years or something around that range, they would have accumulated a lot more documentation, and they would have written, there's a huge portion of that program that we don't have access to, even with the Freedom of Information Act, because of all those documents being destroyed. So I agree with you that, this goes way deeper, and many of their findings have been implemented on mass scale. And in terms of the sound frequency, it's cymatics. So cymatics, if you look at the vibrational frequency of 432 versus 440, 440 is not harmonious at all. Everything collects in the center, it gets jammed up, it becomes stagnant. Whereas with 432, there's this beautiful design. It's
sacred geometry.
Yeah, it's sacred geometry, and it's life-giving. You can see it visually. It's something that is life-giving, that, continues life, that it reinforces life. Whereas the 440 is, it just destroys life. It brings it into entropy. I believe that a lot of the findings from the MKUltra programs are also connected to random people, without a history, doing horrific things such as mass shootings. And, a lot of the MKUltra programs were designed to create assassins, like foolproof assassins that, were working for the military. But if any of this is to be applied to the general public through the technologies that are now, create this link between any institution and any individual, because everyone's carrying a smartphone with them.
Well, so look at the shooting that happened in Texas.
It's easy to
The guy had $70,000 worth of stuff. He was a poor kid with no money. How did he get like $5,000 guns? How did he get the ammunition for these guns? The ammunition's expensive. It's like $2,000 for that kind of ammunition that he had. He had a $70,000 truck. Every one of these mass shootings, they actually had a psychiatrist. And every one of these shootings, these kids actually were on these antipsychotic drugs that they're doling out to everybody. And they have movies like the movie Us, where they're brainwashing people through hypnosis, and they're showing us what they're doing. We just need to all wake up and realize that this is truth, that it's happening.
I think that's why it's important to bring these stories forward, and people who have experienced this firsthand, or with a parent. It makes it more real for people, because there's a lot of kind of, MKUltra has been thrown around so often that people just automatically kind of associate it to this surreal, fictional thing that happened. But it actually is a legitimate thing that's been going on, and the project itself has evolved over time. It didn't stop evolving. It just sort of went undercover again, because there were people who these doctors did end up killing. And so there's different cases that I've read of, the doctors treating, there was one, it was a professional tennis player, and the doctor ended up killing him, I'm assuming by mistake, during these experiments. And so, there were a few incidents like that kind of, I guess, blew their cover. And then the other people who had long-term, related issues were able to slowly come forth and put the pieces together because more and more information was coming out. So, this is something real. This is something that has happened, that is still ongoing, and that people need to truly look at, as you said, Tina, and truly just understand how it could be applied to a mass level, on a mass level, on a mass scale.
Well, you have to look at it this way. The 40s, 50s, and 60s were the years where they were amassing physical proof that they could do this on individuals. And from then on, the technology was being developed so that they could learn how to do it without the physical being present. They could do this remotely, because then they had the technology and they had the know-how. So what happened in those days with the MK Ultra is going on today on a more subliminal level, mass, to reach the masses. So this MK Ultra ultimately affects everybody. Everybody should be involved in knowing more about it and bringing this out.
I agree. There was also, with the youth of, I think it's what do they call it? It's a kind of like nanoparticle dust powder. That has been well documented as well. And if you go and research this information, you'll see within scientific journals, I found so many videos of people doing the research and, easily finding online the documentation to show that they have already been able to do things like move people's limbs, cause physical movements within people remotely through nanoparticles that are ingested into their body, either through the environment or through direct contact with foods, different anything that might be in anything they consume, really. And how just with that nanodust particle technology, they're able to actually control the movements of people. And all of this is public information. It's all available for people who decide to research it. So even though it sounds so fictional, and this is where I think people prefer to read about it in science fiction books or to see it in Hollywood movies, because it makes them feel more comfortable. They, I think, intuitively know there's been enough information brought forward. People intuitively know, but they prefer rather not to accept it as something happening in concrete reality and affecting their lives and affecting the lives of their loved ones. So they kind of consume that information through Hollywood movies, and they feel more comfortable having it mirrored back to them through within entertainment.
But I think one of the problems is right now that people are so bombarded with all kinds of distractions and so many advertisements and so much that they become jaded. They cannot stay focused or interested in any little thing for longer than a certain period of time. They lose their attention span, and the importance of things just dwindles away if it doesn't have that entertainment value.
I agree. It's almost like they can't relate it to their lives, their behavior, their decision making. I think there's also at the root of that, a disempowerment, right, and slavery that happened over time that just reinforced the idea that people aren't in control. And so there's this kind of innate belief that, they don't have power over anything anyway, and that's why they kind of turn away from it. That's just a sense that I get, a feeling that I get about why people would negate or deny this information when it's presented to them or when they read about it. Perhaps, Tina, you can dive a little bit into, we talked about negative predictive programming and how this is, being implemented in society at large. And I know that you work to bring about positive predictive programming, or that's not really a term, but, positively imprinting ideas into people's minds that help them really gain greater knowledge about why they think the things they do and how they can not be so susceptible to being imprinted upon or subtly suggested ideas through all the technologies around us. Would you like to bring something forth about that?
Yeah, I definitely, because I saw all this programming being done, I realized that, if they can program us, we can deprogram ourselves, right? Or we can use the same programming to program better outcomes. And so I made it my mission to learn about the brain and figure out if we can change all this. And I've discovered that we can. Using kinesiology and other methods, we can, and hypnosis, we can definitely change old unwanted programs and replace them with new, better, more supportive programs. And it's not through electroshock therapy. It's not through anything like that. It's actually something that you can do on your own at home. And it's actually very simple and easy. You have to want to break free from that programming though, right? That's the first step. You have to realize that you're being programmed by everything around you. You're being manipulated by the social media, by the news, by movies, by Netflix. Netflix is terrible. It's like literally telling people how to live their lives through movies. And people don't realize that that's what's happening. Right. And and it's okay that people are looking for inspiration through things. And I love the internet and I love all the information that's coming out. But there is a nefarious agenda in the background that's playing in all of this. So we need to see that. And then you need to start working on reprogramming your brain, getting rid of all these old, terrible beliefs that they implanted into us through TV and through our own experiences, because they are, they're manipulating us so much that they're altering our ambition, our ability to believe in ourselves, our fear levels, and that's changing people's lives drastically. Yeah, everybody has anxiety now. Everybody has trauma now. Everybody has this. Everybody has that. It's like, where do you think that stuff's coming from? It's coming from all this programming. So best thing to do is detach from all this social media, stop scrolling, stop watching TikTok videos every day. And I'm guilty of that myself. I just had to order books because I was watching them myself, and it's so easy. They're so fun and quick. But then I was noticing that even a short video was getting too long for me. I was like halfway through, I'd be like, next. Yeah, no, next, So even my short attention span was getting even shorter. And I was like, oh my God, they're getting to me. I know it happens. I'm playing part of it. It's impossible for us to stay away from it. We're living in a world where we have to become adjusted to technology, right? It's not going away. I don't want to go back to the dark ages, but it all depends on who's running the AI, right? These people running the AI right now are not so good. People running the show in the background are not very good. And they don't have our best interest at heart. They want to depopulate the planet and do all these crazy things that only conspiracy theorists talk about, so.
Well, it's an attention economy, and that's what their model is based on. It's based on capturing your attention for as long as possible and for as many times a day as possible. And during that time, they're definitely trying to persuade you in whatever narrative they are being paid to persuade you in.
Yeah, and let me just say this too. Like, look at the world of psychology. Like, I found a way. I've only been doing, like, I only started getting into trauma healing and all this stuff because I wanted to heal my own trauma, help my family heal their trauma, and it only took me so long to figure out a way that actually works. These psychologists and psychiatrists have been re-traumatizing people over and over and over again. When I went and saw my chiropractor, he said that he said when he did my intake form, he asked me, "Are you on antidepressants?" I said no, and then he asked me again after, and I said no again. He said, "Oh, that's funny because almost every single one of my clients is on antidepressants right now."
Yeah, it's quite horrible. And that, I think, is really just reinforcing it's all about the money, right? And it boils down to profit economy that disregards the well-being of people. And that is essentially what, a large part of the pharmaceutical industry was taken over by that. And I think that a lot of doctors really truly believe that they are doing what is right because they've been indoctrinated into the prescription mentality.
Yes.
The majority of their education was in prescription medication. And so they don't even know how to treat their patients. They have no methodology to treat them in any other way. So it's just
okay. Well, don't get me started on the takeover of the medical industry and who created that whole system that we're talking about, right? And you're right, that's exactly it. These guys don't know any better because that's who gave them their degrees. That's the one who says, no, if you don't go with these people, you don't know what you're talking about. And those people are not there to help you.
I will just mention for information on the cult of the medics, you can go and visit David Whitehead's website. He has done a tremendous amount of work and investigation on this topic, and he's interviewed some really key people. So people can go there if they're interested in learning more about how the industry has basically been taken over by profit and no longer is interested in truly maintaining the well-being of its patients.
Well, just look at pharmaceuticals. Anything that isn't made with petroleum or some kind of oil isn't accepted. They get rid of all of the natural healing, herbs and plant medicine, and they replace it with all this synthetic versions of the plants.
But that's because they want to be able to put other chemicals in with the synthesized natural stuff.
Yeah. It's so nefarious. It's so deep.
We do need to wake up. And Jessica, I sincerely hope that your listeners will look into this MK Ultra situation and not forget to look into Day's situation as well, because it's parallel.
Yeah, I'm just very grateful, and I hope that this share can also inspire other people to do the healing work, to look into it, and to find greater awareness through all of this.
Well, thank you, Jessica, for the opportunity. Appreciate it very much.